Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod, round two with Dr. Sage Breslin. We're going to talk about, toxic relationships and narcissistic men specifically in these relationships and how Sage is helping these women to kind of get out of these toxic patterns and find flow and find joy. This podcast is brought to you by my podcasting company. It's called podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one, you can go to podfire.com or just Google Charles Cormier podcast, for example. I'm gonna pop there, and you can click. And yeah, I'm always open to hop on calls with people. Sage, welcome to the pod, round two. Can you tell us again a bit more about yourself and about what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm Dr. Sage Breslin. I've been in this practice for about 32 years. I am a breakthrough psychologist and coach. And I suppose the best way to tell you what I do is maybe to ask you, that so many of our most talented, well-educated, powerful women seem to attract toxic narcissists and bosses who gaslight us, guilt trip us, and emotionally abuse us. It's actually kind of an epidemic. It's really much more common than people think. And, this rampant soul sucking costs our most powerful women their feminine presence and confidence, their peace and passion in relationships, and access to their personal power. So I said, I'm a breakthrough psychologist, but the reason that I know more about this topic is that I am a toxic relationship repeat offender, unfortunately. And so for myself, I really had to learn how to get myself out of it. And I tell you what, I've done more therapy than God, right? I have done experiential work and shamanic work, and you name it, I have dug into it so that I could really find out how to fully get clear of that soul-sucking magnet. And as a result, I thought, what better thing could I do than bring this to other women like myself who really want to be free of that magnet, of that habit of choosing these toxic folks over and over again. And I put together the Rose system, which is a step-by-step process that not only helps them identify really what's happened to them, but also to identify the roots that has kept that magnet in place. And then we eliminate the roots, and then they can finally put their old soul back into the driver's seat and really embrace their superpowers. So that's a little bit about what I do and how I do it. I'm happy to go into, any further detail that you'd like to hear.
I would like to start with something I'm seeing here, which is come and walk with me, which is a very original way of doing therapy. I think that doing therapy in an office is sort of outdated. First, there's Zoom calls, and then there can even be, we can pursue the therapy in a WhatsApp group, for example. That can be quite interesting, just like asynchronous touches, right? So tell us about that format of therapy, which is come walk with me. I think walking is really therapeutic because it's like moving forward, it's physical activity and so forth. It's different paysage and so forth. So tell us about that concept there.
Yeah. I started walking with clients very early on in my career when they were depressed. I would just say, okay, we're going to walk out the door and we're just going to get our bodies moving. And, I found that it was useful because when you walk, your blood sugar starts to work, your adrenaline starts to work, it gets some endorphins going, and people just naturally feel better when they're moving their bodies. So they would get to the end of the session, they'd say, oh my gosh, I actually do feel better. It's not rocket science. I was a personal trainer before I became a psychologist. So I thought, okay, I'm going to put those things together. But how it kind of evolved into Come Walk With Me was honestly through this vision that I had. And I'd had this sort of static vision for a long time in my life. You might call it almost like a dream snippet. And then one day I was in the shower and I saw this vision of myself kind of having a coffee, watching the ocean. And then all of a sudden it kind of became a video. And I watched a man pull up in his car, and I walked down the steps onto the sand and I started walking with him. And I heard clearly, "Come walk with me." And I began to offer that for a lot of my male clients because the research actually shows that they do better when they're side by side rather than face to face. And so I found it just naturally easier in those cases. Now I'm, a block from the beach. So if I have the time and the space, we'll just walk out the door and walk on the beach. And if we need to stop for a breakthrough or stop to do an activity or stop to rest, we can do it. It's, just at our fingertips. So I've also found that creatives tend to do better when they're outside rather than inside. So it's another opportunity or service that I offer that allows things to be changed up. And as you said, you get your juices flowing when you're moving forward, when you're physically moving forward.
Yeah, I'm certainly that way, not only because I love sports and I'm hooked to it, but also I'm a bit claustrophobic, like I need my space, If someone comes in my face and I only react with fight, so you're gonna get fight out of me if you're in my face.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, walking is definitely recommend. Why do you, where does claustrophobia comes from? It's like this feeling of being stuck, and wanting your space. Aren't humans wired that way? Where does that come from?
Um, well, claustrophobia has lots and lots and lots of different sources. So I can tell you, I had a client who used to play hide and seek with his siblings. And I guess their version of a prank was to lock him in the closet where he was hiding. And he became deathly afraid of small spaces. There are people who have birth traumas where they get caught in the canal, and then there has to be an emergency C-section in order for them to be born. And the body can actually imprint all that and leave them feeling uncomfortable with tight clothing, tight spaces. It's so different for each person how they feel when, if somebody's in your face. It may be that you roll it back and you had an uncomfortable fight with somebody on the schoolyard, and you may think like, well, I'm past that. And yet your body holds this feeling of anxiety or discomfort when people get too close to you. So it's probably different for everyone, but it's really interesting how easy it is to recover from that. I myself was claustrophobic for most of my life. And when I did shamanic training, we were doing a lot of these, sweat lodges. And one of the sweat lodges in Mexico that I went in was more like a kiva. So for anybody who's ever it looked a little bit like a porcelain stove, and you had to crawl all into it. And then once you were in, it was hot as Hades. And I remember thinking, I'm going to die. Like, this is my worst possible scenario. And as I sat there, I just started repeating something that came into my mind. And that was, it's good to be back in the womb. It's good to be back in the womb. It's good to be back in the womb. And weirdly, I was hot, but I just stopped feeling anxious. And that was the very last time I felt uncomfortable in small places. So it may just be as simple as that. We just have to kind of backtrack until we know.
I love those, by the way, temascales. I actually have one of them today at 8. Yeah, I did so many of them, but yeah, me, it's like when you're in a club, and there's a lot of people, and I guess that gets reinforced by the terrorist attacks nowadays. Terrorists, they take
Yes.
advantage of like tight spaces with a lot of people. And then I read about some stampedes, that
Yes.
occurred, by the way, on a terrorist attack in a stadium. I forgot where in England, but people just panic, run in all directions, squish one another.
Yeah.
And I think that it comes on my side from when we would play football in the schoolyard and when people would just stop one another, and being at the
Yes.
bottom and not being able to breathe, and
Yeah.
the top like having fun. Haha, it's funny we're at the top. Well, the guy at the bottom, he's not fucking breathing. So
Right.
you should try to have a bit of empathy for that poor guy down there, which was me
Exactly.
sometimes. The shamanic training is quite interesting. And yes, the temazcales, you're like in the womb, and they're really life changing also for people that are maybe scared of the dark, because it gets like pitch black in there.
Mhm.
And the fear of heat, which I guess is another fear. Not a lot of people have that one, but yeah, they're just amazing. You come out of them and you go back to life. Your shamanic training, tell us a bit more about it, and how do you intertwine that with your modern psychotherapist training?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of people know that I was born clairvoyant. I didn't ask for it. I mean, there's kind of a family history, but I was born that way, and I always felt different because nobody talked about it. And I didn't really know, how to operate in the world, knowing more or seeing more than other people did. And finally, when I was in my mid 30s, I had an opportunity to work with a man that I had come to know through actually like a therapy circles, treatment center circles, and who was a shaman. And so I went down to Teotihuacan, and where he has his retreat center. And I, in my mind, was going to go to this retreat with him for 5 days and just kind of see what he did. And I learned very quickly that this was where my gift would really come in very handy. And by the end of the retreat, he said, "So I think you would be well to apprentice under me. And I think you have natural abilities to lead people in this way and to do this work." And I ended up working with him as an apprentice for a year. And then I worked with him as a co-leader for another 2 years before he kind of gave me my walking papers and said, "There's nothing more I have to teach you. It's your turn to be the shaman, take on your own apprentices, and move forward in your life." And so I spent 10 years in Teotihuacan, taking all sorts of people through the structure of the pyramids, the blueprint of the pyramids. And that particular location has a very specific way that you work on healing and uplifting and transformation. And eventually I traveled to all sorts of other places in the world. And I think now, as long as I let people know that I have something to offer, even in therapy, I ask them, "Do you want to know? Something is coming through for me. I can offer that to you, or I can stay silent. It's not, I don't care." And almost everybody that shows up to work with me says, "Yes, please." I like that.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, how can you refuse that, right? Your curiosity is always big. For example, what do you see in me if I ask you?
Are you asking me to give you what I get intuitively about you?
Yes.
And you sure you want me to answer that question?
100%.
Yeah. So now we've had a chance to talk a few times, and I would say that what comes through for me are some images of you, I think, as a little boy. And I do have a sense of things that must have caused you to feel afraid or uncomfortable or anxious when you were younger. And then as you aged, I think you took on a much more, um, I could say assertive, but almost aggressive, straightforward way with dealing with people who made you uncomfortable. And I think at this stage of your life, what comes through is you're trying to marry that all up. You're trying to find this sort of, all right, how much can I just be soft and connected and healing, but still be, a ball busting um, expert who takes the horns and just takes the ride. So those are the images that come through for me. I don't know if they resonate with you or not.
Well, everything resonates in some sense, you know, it's just like in percentages, but I'm a weird mix of things, you know. So I think, yeah, I don't try to be like the way I am, you know, it comes in very natural. I think I had that that drive in me from the get-go, and that testosterone. But yeah, the child in me, I think I play a lot, you know, and I think I am a child. Maybe I'm being too much of an adult nowadays. Who knows? That's my feeling, you know. You feel that clairvoyance is, you know, your brain and your gut and your full body getting some data, and it's not like that woo-woo stuff of like mind teleporting and connecting to outer realms. Like, what is your definition of clairvoyance?
Well, for me, how I think about it is I just think I'm like a stereo receiver that is on loud. And, you know, if we are all these energetic beings, you know, protons, neutrons, electrons, like spinning around very quickly, you know, we like to think we're dense and solid, but we're really not. And, you know, thoughts are only energetic strings that just move through our minds, and sometimes they move through the air. And so I think that I just happen to be, I don't know, tuned up a little bit better than the average bear to receive information. And for me, when I receive it, it becomes visual. That's like my first thing. Sometimes I'll just get a feeling in my body. If I'm with a client and they're describing something, I may feel like a choking sense. And I'll say, okay, what you're describing was, I mean, people with assault or trauma come to me often. And I'll say, I know you haven't talked about this, but I need to ask, you know, did that person put his hands around your throat? And that's not based on an image maybe that's come to my mind. It's a feeling like around my own throat. So, you know, when I'm working in those situations, I'd say that those kinds of intuitions or downloads are really, really helpful, because I don't have to wait for the client to feel comfortable enough to share that level of detail. It just comes to me and I ask a question and we leapfrog.
And did that ever happen to you? Someone choking you?
Personally, yes.
Right. So
You know, I
it's
mean,
like data, right? And okay, I was in
yeah,
that situation and I identified these things, and because to me that's, you know, it's data, and it's the full body digesting the full. It's a really gutsy thing also. Listening, me, I'm not the best listener, you know, or but I'm quite good at retaining data and taking care of that brain. These feelings, maybe I'm a bit less feeling like in my body, but I'm very visual, you know, like, so if someone tells me something, my brain, it goes to places, it chung chung chung.
yeah,
This this mix of yours into modern and ancient wisdom, I guess your clients must appreciate that. You also offer these corporate programs, which caught my attention on your website. How do you penetrate the tough armor of an executive that might even be narcissistic themselves, or have a hint or spice of megalomania in them? Like, how do you get them to understand the importance of diving deep and potentially creating some change in there?
yeah. I mean, with the narcissist, I never know how much change is even possible, but I would say, you know, in the corporate world, I do have programs, whether they're retreats, whether they're masterminds, whether they're self-paced courses, whether it's, you know, in services or training. And when I interview whoever is going to be in charge of that, in charge of the work I might offer, I really try to get a sense for the company, for the executives themselves, and for what might be useful. I think a lot of people reach out to me for some form of leadership training, but authenticity, diversity, inclusion, I have a book on the topic and I have courses on the topic. So it makes it accessible, but those courses all have little exercises. Each module has an exercise. So as you said, for an executive who maybe really does have a strong kind of barrier, doesn't want to be vulnerable, they could take a course, not be in a mastermind, just take the course for themselves, just read the book. And each of those exercises has the capacity to take them deeper and deeper and deeper, and to prompt change if they'll allow it. So in some ways, that's one of the ways I can keep it very structured in a corporate environment. But I also have CEOs who are super eager to do VIP days. And I think my female, CEOs, COOs, CFOs, they want access to the Rose system. They want access to the VIP membership for a year. They want that one-on-one time with me. And they want everything I can offer. They want it all. They want to come walk with me sometimes. They want, the downloads other times. They want those monthly tune-ups. They want it all.
And what about like being in group, and opening up to your peers that normally have barriers around them? They're not family, they're not spouses.
Sometimes that helps.
Yeah.
Sometimes being in a group of strangers, of 9 other strangers, like in a mastermind, it's almost like the anonymity gives the opportunity or their permission to just be who you are. And it's confidential. It's a confidential setting. We make sure that people's information is held in confidence, but there's no preconceived notions about who these people are, because you don't know them. You get to know them pretty darn quick. And I think it's interesting how many people, when they share or disclose, suddenly you've got, 1, 2, 3, 4 people nodding. They get it, they feel it. They're like, oh my God, you just told my story. Like, I had no idea anybody else thought that way or felt that way. And again, that's like another form of leapfrogging, right? You're all of a sudden you're in it. And that person doesn't have to worry about telling his story or her story. That person can say, I so relate to the piece of the story where your mom was not a hugger and not emotionally connected to you, like, or whatever they've said.
Yeah, because me on my side, I have a tough time like crying, especially nowadays. I don't know why, but like letting the emotions out, and especially in a group. Why do you think that is?
Well, I guess it's different for everyone. I mean, sometimes we've just so trained ourselves to be emotionally disconnected or compartmentalized that then it is just harder to connect with those emotions and allow our bodies to relax enough to have tears. I mean, and then there are other situations where you're watching something on television and the Hallmark commercial comes on, and suddenly you're, sobbing. Nobody else is around and you're sobbing. So it's not that the emotion's not there. It's just, where will you allow yourself to actually be vulnerable and let the feelings actually come up and out?
I think it's an armor that I put on me because like I've been grinding quite hard for the wedding, and I've been like putting emotions on the side for an extended period, like 3, 4 months, just grinding, grinding, grinding. And yeah, I think I'll need to hit the psychedelics again to get that down almost instantly. What's your opinion on that? Because to me it seems that psychedelics are like a super fast track to getting me in the zone, whether that's opening the floodgates of emotions or just getting really deep in a meditative state.
It's totally different for everybody. I don't do plant medicines personally just because I had a brain injury and now my brain just doesn't seem to appreciate any kind of medication. It just, I just don't do well. So I stay away from them. But I have clients all the time who come to me and say, I want to try San Pedro. And I got a gal. I got a gal who does that. And I am happy to refer on to people who are really good at what they do, good at holding space, making sure those journeys are safe and productive. If you just want to go out and use to have a good time, well, that's not really anything that I don't participate in that. But if somebody is, as you said, wanting to go deeper or feeling like they're just so inhibiting themselves and they want to try plant medicines to move beyond those barriers, for some people, it is the answer. I'd like to believe that most of the time we can access that information without plant medicines. It's probably where shamanic journeys come in and are very effective as well, with or without plant medicines. So just depends on the person.
I'll say thank you so much for the value you've added today. Where can people find out more about you?
They could go to my website at sagebreslin.com. I try to make sure I have as much information as I can. I know it's not popular to do it that way, but I love to make sure that people can find out about me, about the services. There's a tag for taking our Old Soul Woman quiz on there. There's info about both the corporate stuff, the personal stuff, and even about the Rose system.
It was Dr. Sage Breslin and Charles Cormier for another founder of WisdomPodcast.com.